people! Today I want to talk about photosynthesis. Photosynthesis can be one of the most challenging topics in biology, but have no fear. What I'm going to do for you today is I'm going to summarize the whole process, and you will see this will probably be the easiest way anyone has ever explained photosynthesis to you. So I'm going to summarize photosynthesis, focusing on the reactants and the products. All right, let's jump into it. So I'm going to summarize all of photosynthesis using this image. And so let's first talk about where we are. So here is a plant cell, and you guys should all be familiar with cells by now. And so this is a plant cell, and the organelle that is performing photosynthesis is the chloroplast. So what we are looking at is inside the chloroplast. Okay, so now let's look at this image. We are going to summarize this entire diagram here, and by the end of that, you should fully understand photosynthesis. So this green oval shape here, that is inside a chloroplast, and this is everything that is happening inside a chloroplast. So let's first talk about the reactants and products of photosynthesis. Reactants are what goes into something, and products are what comes out. So there is water and carbon dioxide that go into photosynthesis. So again, the reactants of photosynthesis are water and carbon dioxide. And we should all be aware that plants need water and they breathe carbon dioxide. So water and carbon dioxide are the reactants for photosynthesis. The products are going to be oxygen and glucose, or some type of sugar. Okay, so I'm going to repeat myself a lot because we really want to understand this summary. The reactants of photosynthesis are water and carbon dioxide, and the products are oxygen and glucose. Sunlight is the energy that is used to power the light reaction. Okay, so plants need sunlight, they need water, and they need carbon dioxide. And during photosynthesis, they will produce oxygen and sugar. There are two processes of photosynthesis. There's the light reaction and there's the Calvin cycle. Let's first take a look at the light reaction. Okay, the light reaction is happening inside these membranes called thylakoids. These thylakoids fill the chloroplast. So the thylakoids are the things that are full of chlorophyll, that have that green pigment. And so the light reaction is called the light reaction because it needs sunlight in order to power the process. So looking at just the light reaction, you have 6 molecules of H2O. So 6 water molecules go into the light reaction. The energy from the sun, solar energy, will power the process of removing the hydrogen from the H2O, removing the hydrogen from the water, and then the oxygen is breathed out by the plant. So wait a minute, let's talk about this a little bit more in depth. What is the reason that plants want water? Well, plants want water because they want the hydrogen. So the plants do not care about the H2O, they care about the H2. They want the hydrogen. So plants drink water, it goes into the light reaction. The solar energy will power the light reaction. The light reaction removes the hydrogens from the H2O. So water goes in, removes the hydrogens. The hydrogens will stay in the light reaction, and the oxygens are breathed out by the plant. So here's some of the more in-depth thought processes about photosynthesis. Where does the oxygen come from that we breathe? Well, the oxygen that we breathe came from water molecules. Plants take in water molecules, separate the hydrogens, and then breathe out the oxygens. So the oxygens that we are breathing, the ones given to us by photosynthesis, came from the water molecule. So one more time, water goes into the light reaction and oxygen comes out. The hydrogens stay in the light reaction. So why does the plant want those hydrogens? Well, the formula for glucose is C6H12O6. So you have carbons, hydrogens, and oxygens. So the plant needs to have carbons, hydrogens, and oxygens in order to make sugar, which is its goal. So now it has those hydrogens. It needs to get those hydrogens over to the Calvin cycle, which is where the sugar will be made. Okay, so what does the Calvin cycle do? The Calvin cycle makes the sugar. Okay, so the hydrogens have to go from the light reaction to the Calvin cycle. How does that happen? Well, you have this energy carrier molecule called NADP+. Sometimes, depending on what class you're in, you might need to know that it is nickeraldehyde diphosphate, but most likely you can just call it NADP+. NADP plus is an energy carrier. What type of energy does it carry? It carries hydrogens. So NADP plus will come over to the light reaction, grab those hydrogens that have been separated from the water molecules. So NADP plus will come over, grab a hydrogen, and now it is called NADPH. The H is because of that hydrogen that it picked up. NADPH will now carry that hydrogen to the Calvin cycle, dropping it off to be used in order to make sugar. So NADPH will come over, drop off the hydrogen in the Calvin cycle, and then it will return as NADP+. The NADP+ will go back and get another hydrogen as NADPH carried over to the Calvin cycle, and this cycle continues where NADP+ is picking up hydrogens and taking them to the Calvin cycle. All right, well, the Calvin cycle has hydrogens now, but it also needs carbons and oxygens. Keep in mind that our glucose formula is C6H12O6. And if we look over here, we started with 6 water molecules, so that's 6 H2s. 6 times 2 is 12, so that means we had 12 hydrogens. So 12 hydrogens were carried over to the Calvin cycle. There's our 12 hydrogens. So now the Calvin cycle still needs carbons and oxygens. Well, conveniently, carbons and oxygens come together in a form called CO2, carbon dioxide. And so plants will breathe in carbon dioxide, so you need 6 CO2 molecules. Those 6 CO2 molecules will come into the Calvin cycle, and they will be rearranged, adding the hydrogens to the carbons and the oxygens, so that way you can get C6H12O6. So keep in mind that we are going to get carbons and oxygens over here in order to make our glucose. All right, well, the Calvin cycle needs energy in order to move these molecules around. In order to move these atoms and connect them, we are going to need some energy. Well, the light reaction is the only reaction that uses solar energy. The Calvin cycle does not use solar energy, so it also needs to get energy from somewhere. Well, the energy that the Calvin cycle uses is ATP, adenosine triphosphate. ATP is pretty much the energy that life runs on. It is the energy that humans use, that all animals use, that plants use. Basically, anything living runs on ATP, adenosine triphosphate. And where is that energy stored in ATP? It is stored in the third phosphate. And so what happens is when ATP comes over to the Calvin cycle, that third phosphate pops off, releasing energy, and then ADP, adenosine diphosphate, because it lost its phosphate over in the Calvin cycle, ADP will now go to the light reaction, and the solar energy that is being used by the light reaction to power the hydrogens also generates some ATP. If you want to know how that's done, check out my video on the light reaction, but right now this is just a summary. So ADP, adenosine diphosphate, comes to the light reaction where it will pick up an extra phosphate, and that solar energy helps power adding a third phosphate to the ADP. So the ADP becomes ATP, and that ATP energy will then go to the Calvin cycle to power the Calvin cycle. So one more time, we have water entering the light reaction, the hydrogens are broken off of the water, and the oxygen is breathed out by the plant. Those hydrogens are carried over to the Calvin cycle by NADP+, which picks up those hydrogens, becoming NADPH, carrying those hydrogens to the Calvin cycle. ADP, adenosine diphosphate, will come over, pick up a phosphate, and then become ATP, which is a charged molecule that will come over and donate that energy to the Calvin cycle, so the Calvin cycle can use that energy to connect CO2 to the hydrogens that are there. So carbon dioxide is breathed in by the plant, added to the hydrogens that came from the light reaction. Those carbon dioxides and hydrogens will be put together in the form of C6H12O6, and now sugar is made. Now that we've looked at a summary of photosynthesis, if you are watching this because you are taking a biology class or that you have a test coming up or anything like that, what I challenge you to do is pause this video on this image. Try and explain this image the same way I did in this video. Explain what the reactants are used for, where the products came from, the reactants and the products. Explain what all of the different molecules involved in photosynthesis are doing and where they came from. If you can do that, I am certain that you have a solid grasp of the basics of photosynthesis. This was just a summary of photosynthesis. For most of us, this is all we need. But if you want to go more in depth with photosynthesis, check out my other two videos on the light reaction and the Calvin cycle. All right, I will see you next time.